On May 11, 2011, 6-year-old Timothy Pitzen was taken out of his elementary school in Aurora, Illinois, by his mother, Amy. She arrived unexpectedly and told the staff that a family emergency required Timothy to leave. His teachers were surprised and unsettled by Amy's demeanor. Something about her seemed off. But in the end, they allowed Timothy to go with her, assuming everything was under control. To Timothy, however, it felt like a special treat. He adored spending time with his mother, and the two embarked on what appeared to be a spontaneous trip together. Amy took him first to the zoo and later to a water park. For Timothy, it was like a surprise vacation, just the two of them enjoying themselves. They stayed in multiple hotels along the way, each stop filled with activities to keep him happy. But behind the surface of fun, Amy was deliberately cutting off contact with Timothy's father and other relatives. She occasionally called family members, always sounding cheerful and calm, but she consistently refused to let Timothy speak on the phone. When asked, she would explain that he was busy playing or distracted, reassuring everyone that he was fine and having fun. Despite her upbeat tone, these calls made relatives uneasy. As Amy and Timothy traveled further from home, witnesses who saw them reported that Timothy seemed content and unaware of any danger. Surveillance cameras in hotels also captured images of him smiling alongside his mother, yet certain details of Amy's behavior raised questions. For instance, she stopped at a hardware store and bought items like a notebook and a pen, objects that didn't match the nature of a casual road trip. Her choices suggested she might have been stalling or planning something far more complex than a simple getaway. Every phone call to her husband or relatives carried the same contradictions, an upbeat tone masking secrecy, an insistence that everything was fine while refusing to give real clarity. On one occasion, Amy checked into a hotel alone without Timothy. Where he was at night remains unknown, and this decision only fueled growing concerns. On May 14, 2011, Amy checked into a motel in Rockford, Illinois. By this time, she and Timothy had been traveling for 3 full days. Surveillance footage from that evening showed Amy arriving and entering her motel room by herself. Timothy was not with her, and it was the last time she was seen alive. The following day, motel staff entered her room and found Amy dead. She had taken her own life. The discovery devastated her family. But what investigators found next was even more disturbing. Near her body was a handwritten note in Amy's handwriting. In it, she stated that Timothy was safe but added a chilling line: "You will never find him." She also wrote that Timothy was safe with people who will care for him, leaving behind an unsettling mystery. Did she actually hand him over to someone trustworthy? Or was this part of a darker plan to cover up something more tragic? Her note gave no further explanation, only deepening the uncertainty. Police examined Amy's car, searching for additional clues. Inside, they discovered traces of blood on the seat. When tested, it was confirmed to belong to Timothy. This discovery raised new fears. Was he harmed before disappearing, or was there another explanation? The blood only added confusion and dread to the case. Following Amy's death, authorities launched an exhaustive search for Timothy. They retraced every stop Amy had made, going through her GPS records, checking hotels, reviewing surveillance footage, and interviewing witnesses. Investigators pored over every piece of evidence, hoping to find out what really happened to the 6-year-old boy in those final days with his mother. At that moment, investigators desperately searched for anything that could shed light on where Amy had taken Timothy. As the investigation went deeper, more puzzling discoveries were made. Amy's car showed signs of having been driven along dirt paths and grassy trails, suggesting she had taken through rural and secluded areas, likely far away from cities or towns. But the big question was, where exactly? Search teams combed through woods, parks, and remote locations that matched the traces of dirt and vegetation found on her car. Despite all these large-scale search efforts, Timothy was still missing. Meanwhile, Timothy's disappearance began making national headlines. News outlets broadcasted his smiling face with those bright, innocent eyes. His photo appeared on TV screens, in newspapers, and across missing person flyers. The public became drawn into the mystery, and as details about Amy's final days surfaced, people began speculating. Timothy's father, Jim Pitzen, became the emotional center of the family story, openly sharing his heartbreak over losing Amy and the unbearable uncertainty of not knowing where his son was. Still, he clung to Amy's final note, which suggested Timothy was safe and being cared for. The case sparked mixed reactions from the public. Many empathized with Jim, choosing to believe Timothy was alive somewhere and campaigning for his safe return. Volunteers formed search groups, spread awareness online, and joined the family's efforts. Others, however, grew skeptical of Amy's note, wondering if her words were meant to deceive. Some even believed Timothy had not survived at all. Then, in 2019, 8 years after Timothy vanished, a shocking development occurred. A young man suddenly came forward, claiming he was Timothy Pitzen, and that he had finally escaped after being held captive for years. For a brief period, hope flooded back into Jim's family, who were overwhelmed with the thought that Timothy might finally be coming home. But that hope crumbled quickly. DNA testing confirmed the man was not Timothy at all, but rather a troubled individual seeking an escape from his own life. Even after this crushing blow, Timothy's case was never closed. Law enforcement continues to keep it active, and his family still believes he may be alive somewhere. The mystery remains one of the most famous and perplexing disappearances in America. Some theories suggest Amy may not have acted alone, that another person could have been involved, explaining the periods when Amy was alone checking into hotels. Her note did mention Timothy being with people who would look after him, but to this day, no solid evidence has supported that idea. Yet, the mere possibility that Timothy might be hidden away with someone who knows the truth sustains hope. As Jim once said, you can't give up. If you give up hope, then what's left? Some think Timothy might be out there, living quietly, perhaps homeschooled and shielded from media, television, and modern technology. Years later, in Midlothian, Texas, on April 18, 2016, another chilling case unfolded. At around 4:45 a.m., 45-year-old Terry Missy Bevers, a dedicated fitness instructor and mother-3, was up early as usual. She regularly taught morning boot camp sessions and had one scheduled that day at Creekside Church of Christ. She was known for arriving early to set up. At about 5:20 a.m., Missy entered the church parking lot, headlights briefly flashing before she parked. Carrying her workout equipment, she walked inside, unaware of the danger that awaited her. Unbeknownst to her, hours before she arrived, someone had already broken into the church. Security cameras revealed a strange figure roaming the building around 3:50 a.m. This person was dressed head to toe in SWAT-style tactical gear. Helmet, gloves, vest, completely concealing their identity. This odd outfit puzzled investigators. Was it a disguise, or was it meant to send some sort of message? The footage showed the intruder wandering through the church, not targeting valuables, but instead aimlessly opening doors, tapping walls, and inspecting rooms. The figure moved slowly, almost casually, as though they weren't in a hurry. Sometimes they even paused, standing silently before moving again. Their walk appeared awkward, even staggering at moments, as though they were unfamiliar with the building or in some sort of daze. Then, at 4:20 a.m., just as Missy entered, the camera footage stopped. To this day, no one knows how much time passed between her arrival and her encounter with the intruder. But soon after, tragedy struck. Missy's students arrived for class, only to discover her body inside. She had been brutally attacked, with injuries believed to have been caused by a hammer left nearby. Detectives turned to the church's surveillance footage for answers, but instead found more confusion. On the tapes, the intruder was seen breaking random objects and glass, which led police to consider the possibility of a staged burglary. But that theory didn't add up. Missy's purse and iPad were left untouched. Why choose a church, and why kill Missy? Investigators replayed the footage countless times, studying the intruder's unusual gait, clumsy, almost as if the shoes were too large. Online sleuths began comparing the walk to people in Missy's life, even pointing out similarities with her father-in-law's stride. But the so-called evidence was flimsy at best. Initially, even police considered the intruder might have been female, given the ill-fitting tactical outfit. Still, that avenue led nowhere, As detectives looked deeper, they examined Missy's personal life, interviewing her husband Brandon, her children, friends, and colleagues. Everyone cooperated, describing Missy as kind, well-loved, and devoted to her work. But some friends noted Missy had recently voiced unease about odd LinkedIn messages she had received from an unknown man, messages that struck her as creepy and unsettling. The police made efforts to track down a person of interest in the case, but this lead eventually turned out to be a dead end. Detectives carefully documented all the information they gathered, yet not a single detail seemed to point directly to a clear suspect. Even today, the case of Terry Missy remains completely unsolved. Alyssa Turney was a typical 17-year-old high school junior living in Phoenix, Arizona, with her father Michael Turney and her half-sister Sarah. Like many teenagers, she had a part-time job, close friends, and hopeful dreams about the future. But on May 17, 2001, everything changed forever. That was the day Alyssa vanished without leaving any trace, and the mystery of her disappearance would torment her family and community, leaving them searching for answers for many years. It was the last day of school, and Alyssa had been eagerly looking forward to summer break. She and her friends had already made celebratory plans, and everything seemed like a normal beginning to what should have been a carefree summer. However, what unfolded that afternoon became clouded with disturbing and confusing details, many of which came from her father, Michael himself, the last person known to have seen her alive. According to Michael, he picked Alyssa up around lunchtime from Paradise Valley High School. He claimed that they stopped at a local restaurant for a meal before heading back home. Once there, he said they got into a heated argument. Michael later told police that Alyssa stormed out of the house, yelling that she was leaving and heading to California to live with her biological aunt. To reinforce this account, Michael insisted that he discovered a handwritten note from Alyssa in her room, essentially echoing the exact words she had used in their argument, that she was running away. But this note never sat right with Alyssa's family and friends. For one, none of her important personal belongings were missing. Not her phone, not her purse, nothing she would have realistically taken if she intended to run away. Furthermore, she never mentioned these supposed plans to any of her closest friends. Why would she suddenly vanish without telling anyone she trusted? At first, authorities treated Alyssa's disappearance as a typical runaway case. They believed she might have really gone to California or was still hiding somewhere in Phoenix. However, suspicions began to grow when investigators discovered that Alyssa's bank account, which contained around $1,800, had been left completely untouched. She also never reached out to any of her friends or family. As the investigation deepened, police uncovered troubling behavior from Michael. It turned out that he had been monitoring Alyssa's movements in ways that went far beyond what most would consider protective. In fact, he appeared to exert an unusual level of control over nearly every part of her life. At Alyssa's job, her co-workers noticed how Michael would unexpectedly show up, sometimes even bringing along a video camera. On one occasion, he secretly recorded Alyssa while she interacted with customers, co-workers, and friends, claiming that he only did it to ensure her safety. But there was no reasonable explanation for why he needed to keep such obsessive watch over her. Michael's surveillance wasn't confined to her workplace either. Police later found he had installed surveillance devices throughout their home. One of the most disturbing discoveries was that he had even placed hidden recording equipment in the family's bedroom. It remains unclear how often he actually reviewed these recordings, but what was clear was his intense desire to constantly monitor Alyssa's behavior and conversations. This type of controlling behavior seeped into almost every corner of her life. Michael closely regulated Alyssa's social interactions, screened her phone calls, and often limited the time she was allowed to spend with friends. Those who knew Alyssa reported that his protective facade actually made her feel stifled, uncomfortable, and trapped. Her friends later recalled how Alyssa would complain that she couldn't do anything without her father knowing about it. Over time, the suffocating restrictions fueled resentment, and Alyssa began to grow more and more frustrated with his constant control. When police began interviewing those close to Alyssa after her disappearance, they heard chilling stories. Her boyfriend, her stepbrother, and one of her close friends all independently share accounts of things Alyssa had told them, that Michael had attempted to touch her in illegal and inappropriate ways. In one disturbing story, Her stepbrother recalled being in a car with Alyssa when Michael scooted closer to her and tried to touch her in ways that were absolutely unacceptable. Perhaps even more bizarrely, Michael himself once called Child Protective Services before any official accusations were made. He warned them that if Alyssa ever called to accuse him of inappropriate behavior, they shouldn't believe her because she was a liar. This, of course, is hardly the behavior of a caring and innocent father. Police also followed up on the story about Alyssa supposedly going to live with her aunt in California. But when they contacted the aunt, they learned that she had not heard from Alyssa and was not expecting her. This revelation completely undermined Michael's explanation. If Alyssa had really been planning to run away to her aunt's house, why would she never reach out to her? By this point, the case was looking less like a teenage runaway and much more like a disturbing mystery. But without physical evidence proving that a crime had occurred, investigators were stuck. One of the most unsettling details was Michael's strange response in the aftermath of Alyssa's disappearance. Normally, parents of missing children spring into action. They call friends, knock on doors, visit every place their child could possibly be, and contact police immediately. Michael did none of this. Instead, he waited 5 full days before reporting Alyssa missing. When asked about the delay, Michael explained that he simply assumed Alyssa would return after she had cooled off, insisting she was just a rebellious teen who had run away in a moment of anger. Years went by with no answers, and Alyssa's case grew colder. Yet one voice refused to let her story fade. Her younger sister, Sarah, motivated by a deep need to understand what had really happened. Sarah became the strongest advocate for Alyssa's case. For years, she wrestled with her own confusion, tried to reconcile the loss of her sister with the strange, suspicious stories told by their stepfather. As Sarah got older, her doubts grew stronger. She began to notice the inconsistencies in Michael's story, realizing that much of what he told her didn't make sense. Although police had long classified Alyssa's disappearance as a runaway case, Sarah became convinced that something much darker had happened. At first, she tried confronting Michael directly. She asked him what really happened that day, but Michael stuck to his original claim that Alyssa had simply left of her own free will. He told Sarah that Alyssa no longer wanted to be a part of their lives. But Sarah could never shake the feeling that her stepfather was hiding something critical. When Sarah reached out to law enforcement, she hoped they might reconsider Alyssa's case. But with no new physical evidence and the case still officially labeled as a runaway, police weren't able to do much. Even so, Sarah refused to give up. Determined not to let her sister's story fade into obscurity, she took matters into her own hands. Frustrated with the lack of official progress, she turned to social media. She began sharing Alyssa's story online, using every platform she could to spread awareness and build support. Over time, her posts began gaining attention, and she grew a steady online following. But it wasn't until Sarah joined TikTok that her fight for justice truly gained momentum and brought Alyssa's case back into the public eye. On TikTok, Sarah adopted an upfront and transparent style. She spoke candidly about her suspicions surrounding Michael and the struggles she faced while trying to keep her sister's case from fading into obscurity. Sarah did not hesitate to publicly accuse her own stepfather, openly stating that she believed he was the one behind Alyssa's disappearance. This outspoken stance was shocking and risky, but it resonated deeply with people online. Viewers admired her bravery in calling out a family member, even though it meant confronting the possibility of betrayal within her own household. Sarah's relentless pursuit of justice eventually had a major impact. After years of pushing the case forward, in August 2020, nearly 20 years after Alyssa was last seen, police arrested Michael Turney. He was charged with second-degree murder. Investigators had pieced together a troubling pattern of Michael's controlling and obsessive behavior, which ultimately led to the reopening of the case and the filing of charges. The nature of the second-degree murder charge suggested authorities believed he had killed Alyssa without planning it in advance. However, the absence of physical evidence directly tying Michael to Alyssa's disappearance created a significant hurdle for prosecutors. Despite these obstacles, Sarah and her supporters held on to hope that the circumstantial evidence and Michael's suspicious actions would be enough to secure a conviction. In July 2023, Michael's trial finally began. After 6 days of witness testimony, his defense attorneys filed a motion for acquittal. arguing that the prosecution had failed to present sufficient evidence to convict him. The judge ultimately agreed, citing the lack of physical proof of Alyssa's death or of Michael's direct involvement. Michael was acquitted of all charges and released from custody on July 18, 2023. Following his release, Michael struck back legally. In January 2024, he filed a lawsuit against the Phoenix Police Department, claiming he was mistreated during his imprisonment. He alleged that he had been denied proper meals and medical care, and argued that he had been wrongfully incarcerated. As of now, Alyssa's case remains unsolved, and the trail has gone completely cold. When asked if he had a message for Alyssa, Michael repeated what he has said for years, that he loves her and wants her to come home.